The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Chapter 22. It was dusk, and Edward was walking down a sidewalk. He was walking on his own, putting one foot in front of the other without any assistance from anyone. He was wearing a fine suit made of red silk. He walked down the sidewalk, and then he turned to a path that led up to a house with lighted windows. "I know this house," thought Edward. "This is Abilene's house. I'm on Egypt Street." Lucy came running out of the front door, barking and jumping and wagging her tail. "Down, girl," said a deep, gruff voice. Edward looked up, and there was Bull standing at the door. "Hello, Malone," said Bull. "Hello, good old rabbit pie. We've been waiting for you." Bull swung the door wide, and Edward walked inside. Abilene was there, and Nellie, and Lawrence, and Bryce. "Susanna!" cried Nellie. "Jangles!" said Bryce. "Edward!" said Abilene. She held out her arms to him. But Edward stood still, and he looked around the room. "You searching for Sarah Ruth?" Bryce asked. Edward nodded. "You got to go outside if you want to see Sarah Ruth," said Bryce. So they all went outside. Lucy and Bull and Nellie and Lawrence and Bryce and Abilene and Edward. "Right there," said Bryce, pointing up at the stars. "Yep," said Lawrence. "This is the Sarah Ruth constellation." He picked Edward up and put him on his shoulder. "You can see it right there." Edward felt a pang of deep sorrow, and sweet and familiar. Why did she have to be so far away? "If only I had wings," he thought, "I could fly to her." Out of the corner of his eye, the rabbit saw something flutter. Edward looked over his shoulders, and there were the most magnificent wings he had ever seen, orange and red and blue and yellow, and they were on his back. They belonged to him. They were his wings. What a wonderful night this was. He was walking on his own. He had an elegant new suit, and now he had wings. He could fly anywhere and do anything. Why had he never realized that before? His heart soared inside of him, spread his wings, and flew off of Lawrence's shoulders, out of his hands, and up into the nighttime sky, toward the stars, toward Sarah Ruth. "No!" shouted Abilene. "Catch him!" said Bryce. Edward flew higher. Lucy barked. "Malone!" shouted Bull, and with a terrific lunge, he grabbed hold of Edward's feet and pulled him out of the sky and wrestled him to the earth. "Stay with us," said Abilene. "You can't go yet," said Bull. Edward beat his wings, but it was no use. Bull held him to the ground. "Stay with us," repeated Abilene. Edward started to cry. "I couldn't stand to lose you again," said Nellie. "Neither could I," said Abilene. "It would break my heart." Lucy bent to her face to Edward's, and she licked his tears away. Okay, so in the chapter before, Edward was thrown against a counter, and he hit his head, and it went black. So in this chapter, it sounds to me like he's dreaming, like he's been knocked unconscious, and he's dreaming, because he, of course, didn't see all these people. Some of them are dead, like Sarah Ruth, and they can't all be in the same place. So I think he's dreaming, but we'll find out. Chapter 23. "Exceedingly well made," said the man who was running a warm cloth over Edward's face. "A work of art, I would say. A surprisingly, unbelievably dirty work of art, but art nonetheless. And dirt can be dealt with, just as your broken head can be dealt with." Edward looked into the eyes of the man. "Ah, there you are," said the man. "I can see that you're listening now. Your head was broken. I fixed it. I brought you back from the world of the dead." "My heart," thought Edward. "My heart is broken." No need to thank me," the man said. "It's my job, quite literally. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Lucius Clark, doll fixer." "Your head, may I tell you? Will it upset you?" "Well, I always say the truth must be met head on, no pun intended. Your head, young sir, was in 21 pieces." 21 pieces, Edward repeated it mindlessly. Lucius Clark added. 21, he said. All modesty aside, I must admit that a lesser doll fixer, a doll fixer without my skills, might not have been able to rescue you. But let's not speak of what might have been. Let's speak of what is. You are fixed. You are whole. You have been pulled back from the brink of oblivion by your humble servant, Lucius Clark. And here, Lucius Clark put his hand on his chest and bowed to Edward. That was quite a speech to wake up to, said Edward. He was on a wooden table. He was in a room with sunshine pouring in from the windows. His head apparently had been broken in 21 pieces, and now it was put back together in one whole one. He was not wearing a red suit. In fact, he had no clothes on at all. He was naked again, and he did not have wings. And then he remembered. Bryce, the diner. Neil swinging him through the air. Bryce. You are wondering perhaps about your young friend, said Lucius, the one with the continually running nose. Yes, he brought you here, crying and begging for my help. Put him together, he said. Put him back together. I told him, young sir, I'm a businessman. I can put your rabbit back together again for a price. The question is, can you pay this price? He could not. Of course, he could not. He said that he could not. I told him, then you have two options, only two. The first being, go elsewhere and find help. Option 2 is that I would fix you to the very best of my ability, and then you would become mine. No longer his, mine. Here, Lucius fell silent. He nodded, agreeing himself. Two options only. And your friend chose option 2. He gave you up so that you could be fixed. Extraordinary, really. Bryce, thought Edward. Lucius Clark clapped his hands together. But no worries, my friend, no worries. I fully intend to keep my end of the bargain. I will restore you to what I perceive to be your former glory. You shall have rabbit fur ears, and a rabbit fur tail, and your whiskers will be repaired and replaced. Your eyes will be repainted to a bright, stunning blue, and then, someday, I will reap the return on my investment for you by selling you. But all in good time, as they say in the doll business. There is real time and there is doll time. And my friend, you have entered doll time. Okay, so he was dreaming in that other chapter. And so what happened was Bryce picked up all the pieces and he went to a doll fixer, a doll mender. And the man said, I can fix him, but you got to pay me. And Bryce, of course, has no money. So he said, okay, then I get to keep him. So he gets to keep Edward. And he said he's going to make him look brand new. He's going to replace his ears and replace his tail, replace his whiskers, repaint his face. So here's a picture of Edward at the doll mender's place. Chapter 24. That looks like Bryce coming to get him. And so Edward Tulane was put back together again, cleaned, polished, dressed in an elegant suit, and placed on a high shelf for display. From this shelf, Edward could see the whole shop, Lucius Clark workbench and the windows of the outside world. From this shelf, he could see the customers coming in and out the door. From this shelf, Edward saw Bryce open the door one day and stand in the doorway, the silver harmonica in his left hand, the sunlight flooding through the windows. Young sir, said Lucius, I'm afraid we made a deal. Can I see him? Asked Bryce. He wiped his hand across his nose, and the gesture filled Edward with a terrible feeling of love and loss. I just want to look at him. Lucius Clark sighed. You may look, he said. You may look, and then you must go and not come back. I cannot have you in my shop every morning crying over what you've lost. Yes, sir, said Bryce. Lucius sighed again. He got up from the workbench and went to Edward's shelf and picked him up and held him so that Bryce could see him. Hey, Jangles, said Bryce. You look good. The last time I saw you, you looked terrible. Your head was busted in and... He's put back together again, said Lucius. So I promised you I would. Bryce nodded. Can I hold him? So here's Bryce talking to the man. No, said Lucius. Bryce nodded again. Tell him goodbye, said Lucius Clark. He's repaired. He's been saved. Now you must tell him goodbye. Goodbye, said Bryce. Don't go, thought Edward. I don't want to see, I couldn't bear to lose you. And now you must leave, said Lucius Clark. Yes, said Bryce. And he stood without moving, looking at Edward. Go, said Lucius Clark, go. Please, thought Edward, don't go. Bryce turned. He walked through the door of the doll maker's shop. The door closed, the bell tinkled, and Edward was alone again. Chapter 25. Technically, of course, he was not alone. Lucius' shop was filled with dolls. Girl dolls, baby dolls, dolls with eyes that open and close, dolls with painted on eyes, dolls dressed in like queens, and dolls wearing sailor suits. Edward never cared for dolls. He found them annoying and self-centered and vain. This opinion was immediately reinforced by the first shelf mate, a china doll with green glass eyes and red lips and dark brown hair. She was wearing a green satin dress. "What are you?" she said in a high-pitched voice. Edward was placed on the shelf next to her. "I'm a rabbit," said Edward. The doll let out a squeak. "You're in the wrong place. This shop is for dolls." Edward said nothing. "Shoo," said the doll. "I would love to shoo," said Edward, "but it's obvious that I cannot." After a long silence, the doll said, "I hope you don't think that anyone is going to buy you." Edward said nothing. "The people who come in this shop want dolls, not rabbits. They want baby dolls or elegant dolls, such as myself, and with pretty dresses, dolls with eyes that open and close." "I have no interest in being purchased," said Edward. The doll gasped. "You don't want somebody to buy you? You don't want to be loved by a little girl?" Sarah, Ruth, Abilene, those names were Edward's head in a minute with a sad, sweet song. "I have already been loved," said Edward. "I have been loved by a girl named Abilene. I have been loved by a fisherman and his wife, and a hobo and his dog, and I have been loved by a boy who plays the harmonica and by a girl who died. Don't talk to me about love. I have been loved." This impassioned speech shut up the doll next to him. "Well," she said, "still, my point is, no one's going to buy you." They did not speak to each other again. The doll was sold 2 weeks later to a grandmother, purchasing it for her granddaughter. "Yes," she said to Lucius Clark, "that one right there. She's quite lovely." "Yes," said Lucius, "she is, isn't she?" "Goodbye and good riddance," thought Edward. His spot next to the rabbit stayed empty for some time. Day after day, the door of the shop would open and close, letting in the early morning sun or the late afternoon light, lifting the hearts of the dolls inside of them, thinking that someone was coming to buy them this time. This time, the person entering the shop would want them. Edward was the lone person who did not care. He prided himself on not hoping that anyone was buying him, not allowing his heart to lift every time the door opened. I'm done with hope," thought Edward Tulane. Then, one day, at night, right before they closed the shop, Lucius Clark placed another doll on the shelf next to Edward.